The Consulting Success podcast is powered by the Clarity Coaching Program. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team and receive personal coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to find out more and apply.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky, and today I'm very excited to have Michelle Ray join us. Michelle, welcome.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's so great to be with you.
Yeah, Michelle, so you are a keynote speaker, a consultant, a coach, and author. You've been running your business, Lead Yourself First Enterprises, for over 27 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Just shy of that, yes.
There we go, right? So you've seen a lot, you've been through a lot. You've worked with some very well-known organizations like McDonald's, Dell, P&G, PayPal, the FBI even, and many others. And your latest book, which we'll definitely be talking about today, is Leading in Real Time. And that really is business owners, what successful leadership looks like in the modern era that we are all in here today. So I'm excited to dive into all that with you today. But what I'd love to do is get into some practical applications and strategies for leaders so that we can share this to help consultants run more successful businesses. Let's go back in time a little bit, though, before we kind of get into some of those practices, because I'd love to know kind of like how you got started. Before you started your consulting business almost 27 years ago, what were you doing and kind of what was that lead up to starting the consulting business?
Well, starting my business really came down to one thing. I had an experience when I moved to Canada with a non-profit organization, and I'd worked for that organization in Australia, and they're all over the world. And it was absolutely amazing to me, the contrast between the leadership here and the leadership there, especially in the office where I was working. So my experience in Canada was not as positive as the one I'd had with the leader in Australia, because it always comes down to the individual, So that was really the catalyst for me to leave, begin speaking, training, consulting, coaching, because one negative experience made me think about leadership in a very different way and motivated me to help other people not to be that type of leader.
And now you've gone on to work with some very prestigious organizations. But if we go back to that day in, I guess, 1995 or so, when you decided, okay, this was not the best example of leadership, and I'd like to try and, help to solve this or to help others to be better leaders. First few things that you did, how did you go out? I mean, you mentioned that you were doing speaking and all that kind of stuff, but take us back to that moment. You decided to leave the organization that you were with. What were the first few things that you did to actually start to establish your consulting business?
Well, the first thing I did is I got some contract work. So that really kept the bread and butter coming in, because I think we all need that. And
how did you get that? Just if we could dive in, how did you actually get the contract work? Where did that come from?
Well, my own efforts, when startling to some people that might be on this right now, there was no internet predominantly, certainly not in 1995. So answering ads in the newspaper, there wasn't even any email back then. So really that's how it all started for me. I didn't really have the connections. I obviously knew some people from my workplace, but it was very, very different back then, the way that people connected. And especially because I was leaving and I needed to carve a new path. I wasn't always, I wouldn't necessarily expect those individuals were going to help me. So I really had to be out there for myself. And there was one opportunity that struck me, and it was an organization that was looking for people to do leadership training and other types of training. And I jumped at that, and it was just an incredible, incredible opportunity. And I spoke all over the world for them and did that for a number of years and started to make my own way. That's really how it began. And in that process, I was doing a lot of research already, because it was required for the type of workshops and seminars that I was delivering. I had to really know what I was talking about to be relevant and to be credible. So it opened my eyes.
Yeah. Do you feel like, just if you go back in time to that moment where you saw that ad or the opportunity with that organization, did you feel very confident in yourself at that time? Did you consider yourself to be an expert at that time? Or was it just more kind of a passion and a drive within that pulled you and kind of pushed you to reach out to that organization?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to have called myself an expert back then, but certainly I could see what they were offering. I could see that because they worked with so many different companies and different individuals coming to these workshops, that it would really be a great way for me to hone my skills in front of an audience, meeting leaders, starting to network, connect with them, have them expressed interest in me and what I would eventually be doing. And so that's really how it all begun for me.
It sounds like that experience was like you identified a point of leverage. I don't know if it was intentional, but you kind of latched onto this organization. They already had a network. They had clients. You kind of just simply need to do your research, learn the materials, and then deliver that. But you were building your own network now through their network.
Yeah, that's how it started. Yes.
When you look at that, so it sounds like there's a lot of positives of that kind of engagement or kind of relationship. Were there any negatives? Was there anything that looking back, you go, yeah, that was okay for me to kind of get started, but there were some things that, I mean, maybe it was the reason that you stopped doing that, just for those who might be exploring that kind of a model and relationship?
Well, I think, there are many reasons why I stopped. It was definitely the time. And, by that point, I'd had a lot of experience and, fast forward 10 or 11 years after that, and I felt confident to do so. I certainly didn't necessarily feel confident right when I started, but when it was the opportunity to be in front of people, I absolutely knew it was my calling, and I never looked back. I think for anyone who's wanting to align themselves with another organization to get that experience, you've got to take the good with the bad, and you do have to maintain that sense of yourself. So if the money wasn't that great, if the money isn't that great, you still look at what you might learn. And that's how I looked at it. There were many things about it that weren't easy. The travel was incessant. The hotels weren't always the greatest, to put it mildly. But I just focused on what I could control, which was how I could, meet people, work the room, hone my knowledge about leadership, and have met some incredible people as a result.
It sounds like you were what some people describe as a road warrior, where you just be out nonstop traveling, right? Hotels, food that isn't that great, hard to make fitness or health work, but you did. And so you accumulated this amazing experience, went from maybe where you didn't feel the highest level of confidence in your skills to really developing and honing those skills to get to a place where you, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but really became an expert, a specialist, someone with a track record now of expertise. Was that the launching off and kind of the reason that you decided, okay, I've now accumulated all this, I can now actually go and do this myself instead of working kind of for somebody, I want to work for myself? Or was there some other reason you decided to kind of take that leap?
Well, it's funny you use the word road warrior, because that's actually a chapter in my first book called Lead Yourself First, where I actually break it down, evaluating the risk of making that kind of a decision. So it was contract work. And it definitely gave me that leverage. And that's when I realized that, especially in the lane of leadership, that's where I really found my passion and where I felt extremely comfortable, confident, understood what was understood the issues that people were bringing forth, the struggles that leaders were having, the struggles that employees were having with their leaders. So I could see it from both vantage points.
Yeah. That's great. And I want to dive into some of these leadership best practices for everyone who's joining us, because we're all leaders in one form or another. And I think you have many great practices that can help. But before we do that, I just want to stick with this idea, or this kind of the timeline of you now leaving this organization to start your own thing. How do you go about getting your first few clients? Was it through connections that you had made? Was it maybe at this point you were able to send emails and not just respond to adverts? Well, kind of walk us through, what did you do to start getting your first few clients?
It was so exciting, Michael, because I was really bold. I put on my own events. And as a result of that, I started building my own client base. Of course, you make connections. I made connections with the contractor. There was a line between how much I could touch those contacts or reach out to them. But by putting on my own events, that's really how it started. Buying lists, believe it or not, over 20 years ago, it was easier to do than it is today. And I don't think I'd want to do that today. I think it's very, very hard. But that's actually how I started doing my own thing and having a little team around me and putting on events in Australia, which actually was a highly successful experience for me. At one point, I aligned myself with the Australian Customer Service Association that existed around the time of the Olympics, when the Olympics were in Sydney. They sponsored some of my sessions and I went from there. So taking the risk. And I think for anyone in business, any consultant, any keynote speaker, you have to spend money to make money. You can get a loan. That's what I did. And there were no excuses. I was just ready and willing to do what I had to do.
Where does that come from? That confidence and that belief that you need to make an investment and take on some risk to see greater rewards? Because I think, consultants in many cases tend to be a little bit more on the conservative side, right? We tend to want things to be perfect before taking action. When you break down how you create success, it's through taking action, not through having everything perfectly planned out. And taking action without having everything planned out, pretty much means that you have to take on some risk because you won't know what works until you actually go out and do that. For you, how did you overcome that? And especially, making an investment into marketing, whether it's securing a room, buying a list, doing all that stuff. And that is an investment. You don't know how it will work until you actually do it. How did you think about it? I'd love you just if you could walk through your kind of decision-making process or filtering process around that, because so often consultants hesitate to invest into actual marketing, right? And they try and do everything that before they actually have to make an investment. But oftentimes making the investment into marketing is the fastest way to see greater results. So what was that experience like for you?
Well, first of all, you never stop marketing. If you're in business for yourself as a consultant, that's my opinion. I don't think there's a day where I can say I've arrived. So now the marketing has evolved. But when I think back, you asked me where it came from. And the simple answer is I think it is definitely in my genes. My parents were risk takers. My father was a risk taker extraordinaire. So my message to your audience would be that I learned early the difference between a calculated risk and an outrageous risk. And taking calculated risk, putting everything into perspective, thinking logically, am I going to end up out on the street? Would I take that much of a risk? We're not going to starve. And there are things that you can do. As I mentioned, you can get funding, you can get support. Today, there are so many ways to get funding for a business and to make it a case. And you can absolutely go down those roads too. I didn't know about those. I don't know if they existed at that time, but I was ready to do it. And it's really more about your mindset than anything else. And I think we all know that.
You're speaking my language. I'm nodding and kind of smiling because, this all is so true in my experience. And I'm very happy to hear you sharing this as well. So walk us through, just so that we have kind of the mechanics and the logistics of how you started running these events. So you chose essentially, here's a facility or a hotel room, conference room, or some place that I can hold this. Is that correct?
Well, it was a little more than that because remember, I'd already had 10 years of experience, maybe not even 10 at that point, of watching this other company. They had a reach of 1 million people. They had a massive marketing list, watching their process, watching how they did it to then take some of those best practices on myself.
So teach us those best practices. What do you do? I'd love to hear.
Well, like I mentioned, I found a great list company. I also had a great support team. I had met people already who I knew would be the ideal individuals to support me as contractors themselves. And they were the ones that really helped me to get it going. And even the very first one, I didn't have a website yet. My first website was in 2001. So I still managed to do all of that without a website, but I had an email address. I had great marketing piece. I already knew someone actually who's based in Vancouver who excelled at design and marketing and brochures. And that was all part of the process. So there were people that I connected with, learned how to connect with them, knew that instinctively they were the right people for me. And that's how I did those events at that time.
Was this a free event or a paid event?
Oh, it was a paid event.
And how much did people pay what was the ticket price to attend?
It varied. There were what I called mates rates for all my Aussie friends watching. So I had group discounts and I think it was somewhere around the $179 a person for a one-day program back then. And they got coffee and tea and it was just absolutely wonderful. And, I was grossing somewhere around $120,000 for the third one that I did. And I was pretty happy with that. I thought that was pretty good.
So how many people would you have had, in that event to generate six figures in revenue from it?
Well, they were in 3 different cities, and Sydney and Melbourne were the biggest off the top of my head. I think I had about a couple of hundred people in each city, and then I did it in Brisbane as well. It was a little bit of a smaller audience back then, but it all worked. And it was from those people that I started to build core clients with a very deliberate intention in my marketing, so that I knew that I wanted to go and work with them one-on-one. That was in my marketing. And then I started building on that client base. And there's one individual that attended that event that I worked with at least 6 times, and in-house with his people, consulting, speaking, workshops. And even to this day, I still do business with that person.
While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months, so don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO.
Did you go into this with the intention of generating revenue, through the ticket sale of them attending? But was the real goal to have a certain number of people from each event become longer term, higher value clients?
It would be a little bit of both, for sure. I wanted it to be a success financially, but I also knew that it was an opportunity based on who was there and who I was connecting with to start building those long-term relationships. So that was one path that I took.
And how many emails did you send to get people to come? Like, thinking back, I'm wondering, how, because oftentimes you hear, follow-up is so important. Frequency, consistency. Were you sending 1 email, 2 emails, 3, 10? How many emails over what period of time leading up to each event?
It was more at that time. I think, as we know, we've got regulations now on how you can do something like that. So I did not bombard people with email. I had a massive list, and I knew that the return, it's something like when you mail out, I did mailings too. So when you mail out to people, you're going to get a very, very low return. But if you've got enough of them out there, then you'll generate enough business to get those people to attend. So it's really, in a nutshell, it's a numbers game.
Yeah. Let's flip for one moment and kind of zoom forward to today. When you look at your sales, your marketing, how you approach generating leads and conversations with new clients, what's working best for you today?
I think this won't be a surprise for many people, but for me, the referral side is really important. I know that, and I just talked about marketing, but at the same time, your best marketing is you. So in my case, if I'm on a stage, I know that that's a rehearsal for the next event or the next opportunity. And that has worked incredibly well for me. I get people contacting me that have seen me 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So for all of us with our client base, being the best that you can be and asking for those referrals as well, I think that is really important. In addition to all of the other efforts, because you have to have a presence. And, to be very honest, I found 2020 so hard that I think it affected me psychologically to the point where I wasn't necessarily doing those things, Michael. But the one thing that I did was I wrote a book. And that was my anchor. That's what kept me grounded and kept me going. And I think we had, for all of us, we dealt with that year in different ways. Some people thrived, some people really just caved, and others just found it all very, very hard. And I did. I found it incredibly difficult, but that was the one thing that I made a decision to do and keep going. I had a definite goal. I had a date. I had a time where I wanted the book to be finished, and I met that objective.
Right. Well, that's a perfect segue into the book. And for us to spend some time now talking about leadership. So your new book is called Leading in Real Time, How to Drive Success in a Radically Changing World. So you mentioned about, writing the book and that process a little bit. I wonder if we could kind of extract some of the principles from the book and just start with a question around the most common mistakes that you see leaders making. And I think maybe even before that, just to hear your perspective on this, because very often people think about leaders, when they hear the word leader, they think that you can only be a leader if you have a sizable team. How do you think about leadership and the principles that we're going to talk about, some of these best practices? When do they apply? I mean, do they apply if you a solo consultant and you just have some contractors? Does it apply only if you have, 5 people or more, or 10 people? Or how do you think about, first of all, just the mindset of leadership?
Oh, such a great question. Are you sure we've only got X amount of time?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, leadership isn't a title. Leadership is a mindset. Yes, of course, people have their position. They have their credibility or perceived credibility based on that title, but it is far more than that. And to me, it doesn't matter. I'm a small business, but I have to look at myself and I have to ask myself, am I the leader of myself? So that when I do have contractors, and I work with a number of them, am I absolutely being the best that I can be? So today, when you ask me about the biggest mistakes and what I feel leaders are doing that they need to do differently, there's so many ways of looking at it, but relevancy is a really big one. So I believe that the number one mistake in terms of the context of my book, which is about real-time leadership is understanding what is right in front of you. As a consultant, what is right in front of you? Do we understand the realities of now? Because the realities of now are not the realities of 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So we need to adapt. So what I would say is understanding that leadership is about you knowing what you need to do in this current environment, which is right now. So leadership is very much present moment based. We used to think about leadership in terms of a long-term strategy, looking out at the horizon, planning our vision. Not that those things aren't important, but the things that demand our attention in the now is what I believe is what is going to determine whether or not we can be successful as leaders.
Right. Could you offer maybe an example or an illustration of that principle or that kind of concept of relevancy and how you've seen that play out, or maybe a mistake you've seen somebody making without naming names, and how you would fix that? So what's a mistake in a real world situation? And then what's the best practice to resolve that?
Well, thank you. And I think the first is it's all about self-awareness. And there are 3 key principles that will come through in my book: being ready, being responsive, and being relevant. So first of all, if one of the biggest mistakes that I see are that people are not ready to accept new realities. And in terms of our own self-awareness, we all know this is a fact. We see it in the news all the time. Our own biases are getting in the way of us being effective. And in terms of the new workforce, as well as customers, they are more savvy than any other time in history. There's a chapter in my book that's called Voices Rising, and it's all about the fact that today our customers, our clients, and our teams have a voice that they are willing to use. So if you are going to be effective as a real-time leader, we need to get in sync with our teams and with our clients, and that means taking a hard look at ourselves. Where are my biases? Am I able to suspend judgment? Am I able to acknowledge others and their views and their opinions of the world, even if I don't necessarily agree with them? Do I come across as being open? Again, this isn't necessarily rocket science, but it is what's going to make you successful as a real-time leader. So it's that, to me, is the start of it all. So what would be one example? Well, one of the first stories that I tell is about a young woman that I met who was a powerhouse, 30-something-year-old, brilliant achiever, leader in the financial services sector, who was experiencing challenges in terms of how people perceived her as a woman, a young woman that was successful, and there were all these roadblocks that were being placed in her way. Now, she was confident and she knew how to manage those roadblocks, but what her leadership didn't necessarily realize is that if they didn't change their ways, they were about or risking the potential of losing an individual who was going to walk out the door with a multi-million-dollar portfolio. So because I knew about this person, I could use that example in my own work with other organizations to help them to understand the need to keep your mind open. And brilliant leaders get this intuitively, and they are very open-minded about how they lead others.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good example. For me, one example that I'm constantly working on is it's often easy for me to look at someone else and, find fault in what they're doing or be critical. And oftentimes when I have that mindset, I'm not doing it because I think they're wrong. I'm not doing it because I think I'm right. It's because I want improvement for them and for me and for, if it's a team member, for the company. But one thing that I've found that's really helpful is I try and catch myself to say, okay, if I'm trying to find fault or if I'm looking at what's wrong with someone and I'm being critical, then first I should be critical of myself. Like what are my biases, as you said? How am I thinking about this situation? And how would they think about what I'm thinking? And so by looking at it both ways, it's really, I find it interesting when I can catch myself, filter through, and now all of a sudden I can have a very different conversation or send a very different email or approach things differently. So this is, it's such important stuff, the mindset of being a leader and leadership, because you're right. Every interaction that you have, whether it's with a contractor, a team member, a client, just, anybody, you have such an opportunity to create better results, right? Time and time again, we hear that in organizations, people are the number one most powerful asset for achieving anything. And so how we manage those relationships and how we lead, how we demonstrate is so critical, yet very often it's the one thing that people don't spend as much time on. They're thinking only about sales or marketing or content or other things out there, yet leadership and how you lead yourself and lead your team, I think are really powerful.
Well, exactly. And we should never underestimate the power of our influence. So let me give you another principle and strategy. And I think this is so important. We are now in an age of parity, transparency, collaboration. We cannot do this on our own. As much as we like to think that we can, even if we're solopreneurs, we still need that support. We still need that network. Again, how you put yourself out there. So many of us, because, we are high achievers, we want to be successful. So, we have this tendency to want to control. And I think that this is one of the other key areas that people need to watch out for. So I'm just going to, for those of you who are going to be listening to the podcast, I'll repeat it and now I'll demonstrate it visually. So we need to lead this way. In other words, what I'm doing is I've got my hands parallel. This is the kind of leadership that people are craving. And if we can understand that and realize that that is the ideal way to build that connection and to have success, it can just radically change the way that you're leading right now and cause radical change in your organization. We also need to know that as leaders, when we've been leading a certain way for a long period of time and you suddenly change your pattern of interacting with other people, you're probably going to get a reaction. And that's why humility is so important. And to be able to say to people, you know what? I'm looking at myself. I'm looking at what I can do differently. And again, it's no surprise, but that is very attractive to people. The more we do those things, the more I believe we can be successful in real time.
Let's talk about the environment that so many of us are in right now, which is working remotely or working with team members, right? Where you're not sitting beside each other. How does leadership different in this age that we are in, where you can't necessarily, be face to face? You're through a screen face to face. Any best practices around that? Anything that you've seen, like common mistakes that people make now because we are so often virtual? And then how to go about kind of remedying those, or what are the best practices for leading in this kind of remote environment?
Well, and I think there was a little article I wrote. It was in the Globe and Mail. It might have been a couple of months ago on this very topic. And I think the first thing is understanding that you are, there are no barriers here. It might look like there is a physical one, but you're seeing right into someone's life and they're seeing into your life. So again, the call for transparency is critical when it comes to being a virtual team leader. I think it's also incumbent on us as leaders to realize that, again, people have their own life, their own challenges happening. They're working from home more than ever before. They want to stay home. And we have to ask ourselves, if we're going to lead remotely, are we ready and willing to be flexible? And we also cognizant of the fact that micromanaging can be even more apparent in this kind of setting, remotely, virtually, than it can be when we're face to face, because people are constantly feeling like they've got to be in meetings, they've got to have their computers on all the time. So is it different in that way? So being more aware of people's time constraints and what other priorities they have going on in their life. And I can't say this enough about a critical component of being a successful remote leader, even though I just said what I said, is communicate. We still need to let people know what's going on, but we have to do it in a way that isn't so intrusive that it permeates every aspect of what they're doing every minute of the day. So not to confuse those two things, we really need to make sure that we are letting people know that we are there, that we care, and we keep them informed about what is going on in our organizations.
Yeah, definitely. 3 questions, Michelle, here before we wrap up. The first is, if you look at your day, your week, and the habits that you consistently kind of go through, that you feel kind of lead to your highest level of performance, your success, the progress that you make, 1 or 2 things that you do every single day that are just essential for you to be the best that you can be?
Well, the first thing, thank you. What a great question. The first thing is that I do whatever I can to make appointments with myself. So I prioritize my work and I literally put it on the calendar and I block those times and I do whatever is humanly possible, with very rare exception, to deviate from those times. So that would be the first thing. The second is to know how to delegate. Do the things that I know is where my brilliance is and let other people do theirs. Again, I'm like many people watching or listening. I'm an independent person. I'm a small business, but there are people that I know now who can do a multitude of things for me that I should not be wasting my time on. So that allows me, second point, to be working on my business, not just in my business.
Yeah, so important. Second question is, in the last 6 months, what is the best book that you have read or listened to? Could be fiction or nonfiction.
The best nonfiction book is a book by a fellow that maybe some of your listeners may be familiar with. I Love It Here by Clint Pulver.
Okay. I'm not familiar with that. I'll definitely check that out.
And I am the name has escaped me as soon as you said it, and I'm going to go off here and then I'm going to remember who it was. But it's a Quebec author for fiction. First name is Louise and her last name has gone out of my head right now, which is crazy.
Well, when you remember, we can try and add it to the show notes afterwards if people are interested. Otherwise, search Louise Quebec, fiction, and maybe something will pop up on.
Oh, yes. Michael, I was going to say one more thing because you asked me for 3 things that I do. And the third thing, every single day, without question, rain, hail, snow, I go outside, I walk. And I do my best to walk for at least an hour a day without no fail. Has to happen.
Fantastic. I'm a big believer in that. I go for a run every morning. Doesn't matter whether it's raining, snowing, whatever. It's something that I need to do to get my day going, get the blood flowing, get into that right space. And then lastly, most importantly, Michelle, where can people go to learn more about you and your work and your book? What's the one place that you'd recommend that they, or kind of point people towards?
Well, at the moment, I would say michelleray.com. That's it, www.michelleray.com. And that's where people will find my contact information, etc. You'll see that I'm constantly evolving. You'll see that in the next 6 months to a year, I'm going to have a very strong presence with on-demand offerings because I think that they are growing in popularity. And I love speaking and consulting and connecting with people. So I would love to hear from your listeners and viewers.
Wonderful. We'll have all that linked up in the show notes. Again, that's Michelle Ray, ray.com, but we'll have that in the show notes. Michelle, thank you so much for coming on today.
It's been such a pleasure, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.